Hey guys, tonight we crawl back through cracked cobblestones and duck under timber-framed eaves to a time when justice was public, punishment was theatrical, and your neighbors were way too interested in your sins. Picture it. A small New England town in the 1600s. The air smells like damp earth, burning wood, and the faint terror of moral panic. You've just been caught. You're not even sure what you did exactly, but the town constable is already dragging you to the square. The stocks await. You probably won't survive this socially anyway. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is, especially if you're listening at 3:12 a.m. while trying not to think about how your ancestors probably endorsed public ear slitting. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wooden stocks creak as you're forced to sit, legs extended forward, head bowed into the embrace of stiff oak and rusted iron hinges. Your wrists slot into position, locked tight. You're now a living statue in the middle of town. Chickens strut by with a level of judgment you're unprepared for. Kids throw turnips. The baker's wife doesn't even look at you, somehow that's worse. Welcome to one of the most iconic punishments of colonial New England, public shaming. The Puritans, ever the party crowd, believed strongly in communal correction. Punishment wasn't just about deterring sin. It was a group bonding exercise, a public event, and maybe even a form of light entertainment for those long, slow afternoons between sermons and sheep shearing. Stocks and pillories weren't about physical pain so much as social pain. You'd be immobilized for hours, left exposed to the elements and your fellow townsfolk's creative insult skills. The difference between stocks and pillories? It's all about posture. Stocks held your ankles, keeping you seated. Pillories clamped your neck and hands, leaving you upright and wildly uncomfortable. Neither came with a cushion. And yes, if it rained, you got wet. If it snowed, well, hope you brought a hat. Historians still argue whether these punishments were more about deterrence or control, but either way, it was clear. The community watched and the community judged. You might be stuck here for a few hours, maybe overnight. Local officials could spice things up by posting a little sign next to your head stating your crime, like drunk on Sabbath, or slandered Goodwife Jenkins. Bonus shame points if you were made to wear a symbol of your misdeed. That's right, accessories were involved. Think big letters painted on placards. L for liar, D for drunkard. There's even record of someone being forced to wear a carved wooden Z. Not for zombies, unfortunately, but for zany, a catch-all insult for disruptive behavior. The crowd was expected to participate. Not physically necessarily, though the odd cabbage was fair game, but vocally. You'd hear jeers, lectures, maybe even hymns sung at you with passive-aggressive enthusiasm. And occasionally, someone might feel charitable and bring you a bit of bread, usually stale. With weevils, there's a sleepy irony in how organized all of this was. These punishments weren't chaotic outbursts. They were part of the civic calendar. Oh, it's market day and we're pillorying Thomas? Let's bring the kids. Some towns built their stocks right near the meeting house or town hall, prime real estate. Others preferred the shaming wall, a designated spot on which the convicted had to stand, sometimes with signs or props meant to heighten their humiliation. One man was made to wear a wheelbarrow around his neck. No one remembers why, but the image has stuck. Still, there were layers. If your offense was minor, say falling asleep during sermon, yes, that was a crime. You might be let off with just a stern talking to. But more often, even petty moral failings earned you time in the stocks. Think of it as the colonial equivalent of being roasted on social media, but in person and by your actual neighbors. And while slowly developing frostbite, you glance over and see someone else in a matching neck clamp, eyes puffy, mouth twitching from trying not to cry. Maybe you exchange a sheepish nod. Solidarity. You'll both be back to churning butter and judging others by week's end. Of course, not everyone thought this method was effective or humane. Critics existed even then, often among more lenient religious sects or European visitors. Some argued it dehumanized people without reforming them. Others pointed out that it could lead to accidents. One account mentions a man who died of exposure during a New England cold snap, simply because the constable forgot about him overnight. A fringe tidbit for you. In Salem, yes, that's Salem, there's a record of a man who was placed in the stocks not for sinning, but for wearing extravagantly large buttons. Apparently, fashion was a moral hazard. You might want to rethink those cargo shorts. Over time, towns grew slightly more merciful. Some shortened the hours, allowed blankets in winter, even posted guards to prevent overly enthusiastic heckling. But make no mistake, this was meant to sting, not slap. And as you sit there, sun creeping higher, the birds louder than justice, the town's daily life swirls around you like nothing is amiss. This is the point, to make your pain part of the village's rhythm. You're less a person now than a cautionary tale with limbs. Eventually, the constable unlatches the wooden yoke with the same ceremony you'd give to opening a pickle jar. Your joints creak. You hobble away. No words. No apology. Just the silent knowledge that everyone saw you, and will remember. Your jaw is sore. Not because you've been talking too much, but because a spiked iron cage has been clamped over your head for the past few hours. No, this isn't a sleep paralysis nightmare or the worst medieval costume party ever. It's the scold's bridle. And you, unfortunately, have been deemed too mouthy. Back in colonial New England, silence was more than golden. It was practically law. If you were a woman with opinions, especially loud or critical ones, well, you might find yourself wearing this charming little device. Crafted from iron leather straps and a healthy dose of patriarchal creativity, the scold's bridle was part muzzle, part punishment, and part nightmarish headgear. It was used almost exclusively on women, under the ever-so-vague charge of scolding, a crime that basically meant talking in a way that annoyed men. The bridle consisted of a cage that wrapped around your head like some medieval dental contraption. Inside, a flat piece of metal, or in some particularly nasty cases a spiked plate, pressed against the tongue. Talking? Not an option. Swallowing? Complicated. Regret? Likely immediate. The term scold wasn't just a casual insult, it had legal weight. Scolding was considered a public nuisance offense, along the same lines as keeping unruly pigs, or letting your chimney smoke too much. Not exactly the company you want your personality to keep. Historians still argue whether the bridle was actually used in New England as often as in England or Scotland, where it originated. But scattered colonial court records and second-hand accounts suggest that, while rare, it wasn't unheard of. And honestly, even if the thing was used once, that's still one too many for a punishment that basically turns you into a tortured mime. You're paraded through town wearing it because of course you are. Everything in this era happens in full view of your judgmental peers. The metal glints dully in the sunlight. Children whisper. Someone makes a comment about your fiery tongue, which would be clever if your tongue weren't currently being crushed into compliance. Oh, and to complete the look, sometimes a bell was attached. So everyone could hear you coming even though you literally couldn't speak. There's something particularly disturbing about a punishment designed not just to humiliate, but to erase voice entirely. Stocks and pillories say, "Look at this sinner." The scold's bridle says, "Let's pretend she doesn't exist at all unless she's quiet." It's control, yes, but also erasure. And it's soaked in gender politics, even more so than the powdered wigs and oppressive corsets that would later follow. In some towns, the punishment was symbolic. Just the threat of the bridle or a mock version made of wood was enough to silence dissent. But in other places, they went full metal. One recorded case in the late 1600s involved a woman in Massachusetts who was accused of railing speech toward her neighbor. The verdict? The constable was instructed to bridle her well, lest her words bite further. Let's pause for a second and just appreciate how unhinged that is. Even weirder, some bridles came engraved with moral sayings, like fortune cookies from hell. Phrases such as "tongue restraint bringeth peace," or "silence is a woman's virtue" adorned the sides. Imagine reading that while choking on your own spit. Inspirational. The open question for historians is whether the scold's bridle was genuinely believed to reform character, or if it was simply a performative act of domination, meant to keep everyone else in line. Most lean toward the latter. Colonial leaders weren't so much concerned with individual rehabilitation, as they were with preserving the illusion of a harmonious, godly community. One less scolding woman, one less perceived crack in the moral plaster. A fringe detail for you. There's evidence that, on at least one occasion, a man was sentenced to wear a bridle after drunkenly shouting obscenities at a meeting house. Equality? Not exactly, but it does show that sometimes even a man's mouth could be too much. You shuffle past the meeting house, iron cage still pinching your scalp, and lock eyes with someone in the stocks. Misery loves company, but not enough to wave. You both stare forward. Somewhere a sheep bleats. Public punishment in New England was as much about the performance as the pain. A woman in a bridle wasn't just being silenced, she was a walking cautionary tale. A mobile sermon with clanking metal punctuation. Her mere presence told others, don't challenge, don't question, and definitely don't speak unless it's to compliment someone's corn harvest. By nightfall, the bridle is removed. Your jaw aches, your dignity is somewhere between the tavern and the church, and your name will be whispered in doorways for the next 2 weeks minimum. But you're free. Sort of. The real punishment is how people look at you now. Like your voice, your thoughts are permanently suspect. Still you survive. You speak again. But softer. Less often. And that was exactly the point. Your ankles are still sore from the stocks, your jaw aches from the bridle, and now someone's pointing at the town whipping post like it's the next big attraction. Great. Welcome to the Colonial trifecta of humiliation. You're marched slowly publicly to a tall, weathered post planted in the center of the village like a tree that grew from shame itself. The crowd gathers. Again, these people really don't have much going on, do they? The whipping post wasn't a subtle punishment. No half measures here. If the stocks whispered and the bridle hissed, the whip cracked. Literally. And it wasn't just for serious crimes. Colonial courts used it liberally. For theft, idleness, blasphemy, or even stubbornness. That's right. If you were considered too resistant to authority, someone might decide your back needed a correction. You're tied to the post with your shirt pulled down to expose skin because modesty somehow is less important than message delivery. A leather whip, sometimes with multiple tails or even knotted ends, is unfurled like a snake stretching out after a nap. You take a breath. So does the crowd. The first lash lands. It's sharp. Blinding. You expect pain, but you weren't ready for the way it echoes. Not just in your body but across the village square. A baby starts crying. A dog barks. The air thickens with discomfort and still they continue. Colonial whipping was choreographed. The number of lashes was determined by court decree. Often 10, sometimes 20, occasionally more. It wasn't supposed to kill you technically, but it wasn't not supposed to break you either. And there are records of people dying from infection or blood loss afterward, especially if the whip was reused without cleaning. Hygiene. Barely a concept. Historians still argue whether whipping had any real deterrent effect, or if it simply fed the community's hunger for spectacle. Either way, it was a staple of early justice, especially for those deemed morally wayward, which, in Puritan terms, meant just about everyone eventually. There's a surprising amount of paperwork involved, too. Officials logged each whipping in town records with details like, John Beckett, struck 15 times for Sabbath profanation. Sabbath profanation, in case you're wondering, was colonial for, I saw him fishing on Sunday. The Puritans believed idleness was a gateway sin. No one had time to lie around unless they were dead, and even then they were expected to do it neatly. So if you were caught slouching, skipping work, or simply wandering too aimlessly, someone might accuse you of laziness. From there, the court could prescribe a few lashes to jumpstart your work ethic. Nothing says get back to your chores like bleeding onto the cobblestones. Now let's take a break from the pain for a quirky tidbit. In at least one town, the constable carried out floggings while reciting scripture aloud. Verse after verse, each lash punctuated by a spiritual reminder. It was like church service meets community theater, except you were the stage. There were also social layers to this. If you were a wealthy or well-connected person, your punishment might be delayed, done in private, or quietly converted into a fine. But for the average townsfolk, or worse, a servant, enslaved person, or outsider, the whipping was brutal, immediate, and public. Speaking of servants, indentured laborers, especially those who resisted their masters, faced the whipping post frequently. Colonial laws even allowed masters to whip servants for perceived disobedience, with little oversight. This wasn't just about keeping the individual in line, it was about reinforcing hierarchies. You try not to flinch with each lash, not because you're brave, but because you know someone's counting. The townspeople track every stripe, every wince, measuring your morality and flayed skin. The whip cracks again. 5, 6, 7. There's no dignity in this. Your body reacts in ways you can't control. You tremble. You try not to cry. You hate that the same people who nod at you in church are now watching you unravel like thread pulled from cloth. By lash number 10, your legs threaten to buckle. The post holds you upright barely. Your breathing is ragged. Somewhere a child asks their mother what you did. She whispers. You wish she hadn't. Finally, the last strike. The constable steps back, whip coiled like a satisfied predator. No words. No apology. Just the silence of a ritual completed. You're untied and left to stumble away, bleeding and dizzy. There's no doctor waiting. If someone offers a cloth or a bucket of water, it's a kindness, not a duty. Strangely, the whipping post itself becomes a town landmark. Over time it gathers carvings, initials, symbols, tally marks. People leave offerings or graffiti. Some view it with dread, others with nostalgia, like it's part of the scenery, part of the story. A quiet scholarly debate still bubbles today about whether these punishments reflected religious fervor, or just raw social control. Maybe both. Maybe the Puritans truly believed pain purged sin. Or maybe they just liked watching someone else suffer for once. After all, colonial life was hard, and nothing builds unity like collectively judging someone. You retreat to your home if they let you go home. Sometimes you were expected to show up to church the next day with your wounds still visible, a walking sermon in scar tissue. It wasn't enough to be punished. You had to be seen being punished. The lesson wasn't just for you. It was for the town. And so you lie on your straw mattress, trying not to move too much, listening to the creak of the wood beams and the distant sound of life going on as usual. The town will forget your pain by next week. But you're back. It'll remember. The fire crackles low in the hearth as you shuffle forward, blinking against the early morning gloom. The air outside is already heavy with anticipation, and not the good kind. No fresh bread smell, no hopeful sun. Just the quiet tension of another public punishment. You're not being tied to a post this time, or fitted with iron. No, today's sentence is something both more absurd and somehow equally degrading. The ducking stool. To be clear, no ducks are involved, unless you count the villagers gathering like squawking fowl. This punishment isn't for theft or drunkenness. It's for something far more scandalous. You've been accused of being a common scold. Again. Apparently, gossip is a gateway crime, and colonial authorities are determined to stop yours at the waterline. The ducking stool looks like a rustic contraption someone threw together after a rough day. It's essentially a large chair affixed to a long wooden beam, mounted over a body of water. Sometimes it's a pond, sometimes it's the river, cold, slow, and ready. You're strapped into the chair with just enough tightness to keep you from slipping out, but not enough to feel secure. It creaks ominously as you're wheeled out, the villagers murmuring, whispering, possibly placing bets on whether your wig stays on. The sentence? To be ducked several times for your foul tongue and troubling of the peace. You consider mentioning the irony of using the term peace, while they strap you into a waterboarding seesaw. But you value what's left of your lungs. The chair swings. Down you go. The water hits like a slap. Not just cold, it's unfeeling. It doesn't care what you said or didn't say, who accused you, or whether the magistrate was just in a bad mood that day. It soaks your hair, your dress, your skin, your spirit. You stay submerged until the onlookers decide you've had enough, meaning just shy of passing out. Then up you come, sputtering, gasping, probably regretting that little comment about your neighbor's bread being too salty. The thing about the ducking stool is that it wasn't just punitive, it was theatrical. Like every colonial punishment, it was designed to show, not just tell. And this one had the added benefit of humiliation by hydration. Historians still argue whether the ducking stool was used primarily to punish or to test. In Europe, the practice was sometimes connected to witch trials. If you floated, you were guilty. If you sank, you were innocent and also dead, so win-win. But in colonial New England, it leaned more toward punishment than trial. Though the line was, as always, blurry and dripping. There's even debate about how often ducking actually occurred. Some scholars suggest it was rare, more of a threat than a frequent event. Others argue that small towns liked it a bit too much. One Massachusetts case from the late 1600s describes a woman being ducked for frequent choleric and brawling behavior, which, if we're being honest, sounds like half the population on a Monday morning. The fringe detail here? In at least one recorded instance, A man was sentenced to the ducking stool after loudly criticizing the town's mill rates. Equal opportunity soaking apparently, though it's safe to say men were the exception, not the rule. You're brought up again, choking, hair plastered across your face. Someone laughs. Not cruelly exactly, more like nervously, unsure what the rules of engagement are when a neighbor is water tortured for sass. This goes on for 3, sometimes 5 dunks. Each time your body is shocked by the cold, muscles seizing, teeth clenching. The sun feels miles away. Your limbs are numb, your mind blurs. You wonder if your sins, real or imagined, are being washed off or just rearranged. Finally, you're pulled up for the last time. The chair locks, the beam stills. You cough. No one rushes to help. Instead, they watch just to see if you'll say something. If you've learned your lesson. If your spirit's as soaked as your clothes. You are released, slippery, shivering, and silently furious. And you walk home, dripping a path behind you like breadcrumbs made of shame. Let's not forget the logistics. The ducking stool had to be near water, which wasn't always convenient. Some towns built special ponds. Others just used the river. A few resourceful Puritans even had mobile ducking stools on wheels. You know, for quick transport to wherever the gossip was freshest. The whole event was usually sanctioned by the court, but occasionally it was more of a community initiative. That's code for mob justice. If enough people were annoyed by your words or presence, they might just haul you down to the river with or without paperwork. This was less about law and more about local theater. And here's a joke that might have crossed your waterlogged brain. You get all this punishment for running your mouth, yet no one ever punished the guy who couldn't stop interrupting at town meetings. Curious, isn't it? You arrive back at your home. Clothes still clinging, skin stinging with cold. There's no towel waiting. Maybe someone, your mother, a sister, a friend, hurries to help, but there's nothing they can say. You've been ducked. It's public knowledge. You can't unring a bell, and you can't unsoak a reputation. But here's the strangest part. The town expects you to just resume life. Back to baking bread, tending goats, keeping your head down. No therapy, no apology, no mention. Just a quiet, mutual agreement to move on, as long as you stay in line. So you do. For a while. But in the back of your mind, the memory stays. The cold water, the spectators, the swing and drop. And a voice, your own, whispering that maybe, just maybe, your words were worth it. The sun beats down across the commons and you're just trying to mind your business. Maybe buy some herbs. Maybe not get accused of sorcery. But it's colonial New England where superstition grows faster than corn, and you've got a neighbor who swears your cat looked at her funny. So here you are. Not tied to a post this time, nor braced on a chair, but standing on the threshold of the unthinkable. You're about to be watched for witchcraft. Now, technically, witchcraft is a capital crime, but it doesn't start with gallows. First, it starts with suspicion, tiny, creeping, and disturbingly subjective. Did you say something too clever? Too late at night? Did someone's cow die after you walked past it? Congratulations. You're on a list. A whisper. A rumor. Suddenly, everything you do becomes evidence. Your birthmark? A devil's teat. That herbal remedy you shared? Black magic. Your tendency to stare out the window at dusk? Possession, obviously. One of the most peculiar punishments during this feverish time wasn't execution. It was the trial process itself. Because it felt less like due process and more like slowly being baked into a pie of public paranoia. You're brought into the meeting house, surrounded by God-fearing neighbors with sharp ears and sharper judgment. You try to explain that the only spirits you've ever communed with are over-fermented cider and Aunt Bethia's ghost stories, but no one's laughing. The magistrate demands a confession. You don't confess, of course. What would you even confess to? So the testing begins. They search your body, every inch. They're looking for witches' marks, moles, warts, blemishes, anything that might feed a familiar spirit. It's uncomfortable, humiliating, and absolutely not science. A woman named Bridget Bishop, who was later executed, reportedly had a third nipple on her shoulder. Or maybe it was just a skin tag. Hard to say, and no one was feeling generous that day. Next, you're subjected to a watch. Local women, sometimes midwives, sometimes volunteers, sit near you for hours, sometimes days, to see if a familiar spirit comes to suckle at your mark. It's absurd. And deeply creepy. Imagine trying to sleep while someone stares at your elbow, whispering about imps. Then comes the swimming test, yes, that old classic. You're tied up and gently dropped into a body of water. The idea? If you sink, you're innocent. If you float, you're in league with Satan. Historians still argue whether this test was regularly used in New England or if it was mostly a European export, but accounts suggest at least a few colonial instances. One woman was tied into a sack and tossed into the river. Spoiler alert. She didn't float. But maybe the most unsettling punishment of all? Public examination. You sit or stand depending on how merciful they're feeling, while your accusers share every weird thing you've ever said or done. Did you mutter when you were annoyed? Did you once guess someone's baby's name before they told you? Did you know how to mix poultices without killing people? That last one's especially dangerous. Female knowledge of healing, particularly without formal education, was always a red flag. Too useful. Too mysterious. A colonial paradox. They needed you when they were ill, but feared you when you were well. One fringe but chilling detail? In at least one trial, a woman's tendency to sing to her chickens was used as proof she controlled animals with her voice. Honestly, that just sounds like talent. You glance across the room and lock eyes with someone you once helped. A neighbor you gave a salve to last winter. She doesn't meet your gaze now. Testifying against you is easier when they forget your kindness, or when they're scared enough to rewrite it. You're not found guilty today. Not yet. The court instead assigns you a form of soft punishment. Social shunning. No one is to speak with you. You're forbidden from attending church or participating in town business. You are essentially still here but erased. That's the peculiar punishment. They don't have to hang you to ruin you. Every step through town is quieter. People cross the street. Children stop playing when you pass. It's like you're made of mist. Your own friends go silent lest they be tainted by association. The worst part? You know some of them believe you're innocent. But fear makes for a better gag than any iron bridle. You sit alone in your cottage, the hours long and heavy. You're not tied, ducked, whipped, or jailed. Not physically, but mentally, socially, existentially, you're bound. That's the clever cruelty of it. You get to survive but not live. And while some accused witches were later reinstated or apologized to, most weren't. Their names lingered in whispers or on court dockets, or carved faintly into stone. And if they died before the apology came, well, colonial regret often arrived posthumously. Historians still debate whether the witchcraft trials were fueled by true belief or by power, land disputes, and simmering resentment. Likely both. A toxic stew of fear, theology, and good old-fashioned human spite. You wake each morning wondering if today is the day the whispers start again. If someone sees a blackbird land on your fence and decides it means something. If the winds shift just enough for your name to catch on them once more. And the worst part? You start to wonder too. About the coincidences. About the timing. About the dreams you've had. Not because they mean anything, but because being alone for too long can make anyone hear echoes. Still, you bake your bread, tend your herbs, and sit at the edge of the commons while life flows around you like water around a stone. People avert their eyes. You avert your tongue. You've survived, technically. But survival in colonial New England comes at strange costs. Your feet are sore from standing, but no one offers you a seat. Not today. Not when you're here for punishment. The stocks wait for you like a bad joke. Wooden, splintery, and custom-built for humiliation. You approach slowly, your wrists and ankles already aching in anticipation, and the crowd begins to gather like moths to discomfort. It's hard not to notice how familiar this scene feels. Not because you've been in the stocks before, though some people have multiple times, but because this is the colonial equivalent of a public post. Everyone watching, everyone judging, no one scrolling past. The stocks, sometimes called the pillory, though there were technical differences, are set in the center of town for maximum exposure. You kneel or sit depending on the design, and your limbs are locked into place. Can't run. Can't scratch your nose. Definitely can't maintain dignity. The sentence? Idle behavior and unseemly laughter in the presence of the Sabbath. Yes, apparently joy is now a punishable offense. You're slotted into the device with all the ceremony of closing a barn door. The wooden boards clamp around your wrists and ankles. Pinches. It always pinches. And then nothing. Just stillness. The waiting begins. People walk by. Some jeer. A few smirk. One kid tries to toss a turnip at your face. Misses. The turnip rolls off into the dust, which honestly feels like a win. Still, your cheeks burn with more than the sun. This punishment isn't about pain, it's about time. And how long it takes for shame to sink in. The historical fact here? Stocks and pillories were incredibly common in colonial justice systems. Almost every New England town had at least one. They were used for a variety of crimes. Drunkenness, laziness, profanity, lying, failing to attend church, or selling underweight bread. You name it, someone's probably done time in the stocks for it. They were cheap, effective, and public. And let's be honest, there's nothing quite like forced immobility in a town square to make you question your life choices. The fringe tidbit? Some pillories were designed to rotate, so offenders could be turned to face the sun, the wind, or the hecklers, depending on the mood of the constable. One pillory in Connecticut had adjustable height, supposedly to accommodate people of different sizes, but also rumored to be cranked higher for taller offenders just to give them a worse view of their social downfall. And here's the kicker. Punishments in the stocks could be coupled with additional penalties. For instance, you might have your offense written on a card pinned to your chest like liar or Sabbath breaker, so even strangers could judge you with proper context. Nothing like a little medieval-style metadata. You sit for hours. The sun climbs. The shadows shift. You itch everywhere, and of course you can't reach anything. The trick, you learn, is to focus on something neutral, like the crooked shingle on the apothecary's roof, or the way the dust swirls in little sleepy spirals near your feet. Time slows in the stocks. Every moment is thick and sticky. You become hyper-aware of your breath, your sweat, your heartbeat. And worst of all, you start to think about why you're here. Were you really too loud? Was the laughter worth it? Could you have simply nodded and smiled instead of snorting at the deacon's droning sermon? Of course you could have. But would that have made you you? Historians still argue whether the stocks were meant to reform, or just to vent social frustration. Some think they were an early form of community-based correction, public pain as private deterrent. Others see them more as tools for social control, keeping certain groups, women, servants, dissenters, in line by making examples of them. You shift, trying to get comfortable. Bad idea. Your shoulder catches, your neck cramps, your back yells in protest. There's no good position here. That's sort of the point. Eventually, the constable comes to release you. No fanfare. No apology. Just a click of the latch and a tired grunt. Your limbs tingle painfully as blood returns to places it hasn't visited in hours. You stumble to your feet, dizzy, wobbling like a newborn foal. The walk home is the real punishment. Everyone's seen you. Everyone knows. You'll be that one who laughed during the sermon for months. Maybe longer. Small towns remember everything. That's part of their charm. And part of their terror. Still, some part of you holds onto a shred of defiance. Because yes, you were in the stocks, but you didn't cry. You didn't beg. You didn't give them the satisfaction of shame. That might be the smallest of victories, but it's yours. And then just as you're turning down your path, you hear it. A giggle. Quiet, barely audible. A child? A neighbor? Maybe even someone sympathetic? You don't look back. But for a second your mouth twitches toward a smile. That's the peculiar thing about punishments like this. They're designed to isolate, but sometimes they expose the cracks in the system instead. You start to notice who's quick to mock and who hesitates, who pretends not to see you and who meets your eyes. And maybe next time someone else is in the stocks, you'll walk past a little slower. Maybe even drop a turnip, accidentally of course, that rolls toward them with something like solidarity. Because even in a town obsessed with control, with rules, with visible consequences, humanity leaks through. In eye contact. In awkward kindness. In the pause before someone laughs too loudly. You reach your door. Your muscles still ache, your pride still throbs. But your spirit, slightly bruised. Not broken. And honestly, given the circumstances, that's practically a miracle. You wake up sore, but this time not from the stocks. No, today your discomfort is more internal, emotional, existential even, because now you've graduated to a punishment that isn't about tying you down. It's about tying your identity to your shame. Welcome to the world of symbolic branding, and not the fun kind with logos and jingles. This is the colonial variety where what you wear, or more accurately what you're forced to wear, tells everyone exactly how society wants them to see you. You step outside and feel the eyes before you hear the whispers. Why? Because you're wearing a letter. Not a stylish initial pendant or monogrammed linen. A big, unmistakable piece of embroidered scarlet fabric on your chest. The letter A. And no, it's not for awesome. You've been branded an adulterer. This peculiar punishment is probably best known through The Scarlet Letter, Nathaniel Hawthorne's 19th century novel, but its roots run deep into the real soil of Puritan New England. The concept of symbolic punishment, forcing people to display their sins, wasn't just literature. It was law. You trudged to the market, your letter catching every shaft of light like a miniature spotlight. You don't speak. You don't need to. Your chest speaks for you. It says, "This person broke moral law." It says, "Judge accordingly." It says, "Stay superior, dear onlookers, and enjoy the view." And boy do they. One man crosses himself. Another clutches his child a little tighter. A woman turns her back, dramatically of course. Not because she's offended, but because everyone needs to see her offense. The historical fact. Colonial laws in Massachusetts and Connecticut absolutely prescribe such punishments. A woman found guilty of adultery might be forced to wear the letter A for life. Men too, though let's be honest, it was applied unevenly. This wasn't about equality. It was about spectacle. The logic was brutally simple. Permanent social marking discourages repeat behavior. Shame is cheaper than jail. And people, as it turns out, are excellent at enforcing each other's misery. Fringe detail. In one case, a man found guilty of blasphemy was forced to wear a paper sign that read, "A notorious liar." Paper. Pinned to his hat. All day. Until it fell apart in the rain. He was then sentenced to wear another one. This went on for weeks. Colonial recycling in its cruelest form. But symbols weren't limited to letters. Some punishments included shaved heads, dyed clothing, or badges stitched into garments. Punishments that lingered long after the official sentence ended. Because even if you took off the letter, the town remembered. And that's the peculiar part. This punishment wasn't time-limited. It followed you, whispered about you, became a second skin. You reached the edge of the commons. Some kids are playing, and one of them points to your chest and asks what the letter means. His mother hushes him quickly, yanks him away like you're contagious. You almost laugh. Almost. And here's a thought you've had more than once. What if you didn't wear the letter? What if you resisted? Historians still debate what happened when someone refused. Some sources suggest additional fines, lashings, or even imprisonment. Others say it rarely happened. Most people complied. Not because they agreed, but because resistance invited escalation. So you keep the letter on. You sew it carefully, ironically even. You choose a brighter red just to mess with them. If you're going to be labeled, might as well make it fashion. The thing is, people get used to the label. Eventually they stop reacting. The whispers die down. The glares fade. But the judgment? That sticks around. Every time you laugh too loudly, someone remembers. Every time you walk too proudly, someone tuts. The letter fades, but the story doesn't. And perhaps strangest of all? Some branded people found community with others in the same boat. Quiet nods in passing. Secret handshakes. Not literally, but emotionally. Because when enough people are marked, the marks start to mean less. You sit on a bench, publicly, defiantly, and let the letter show. The breeze lifts it gently. It flutters. You imagine it flying off like a bird, drifting over rooftops, landing in someone else's life. Maybe someone who deserves it less. Or more. There's a quiet power in enduring symbolic punishment. It's not like the stocks. It doesn't end with a clunk of wood and an aching spine. It lingers, follows you home. It whispers to you in the mirror. And yet here you are, sitting, breathing, being. The truth? Everyone in this town has secrets. Everyone's made mistakes. Yours just happens to be stitched in scarlet thread for all to see. There's an honesty in that. A strange, bitter transparency. And maybe, just maybe, it gives you a kind of clarity others don't have. As the sun dips low, you head home. The streets are quieter now. Less judging, more living. The baker waves. The tailor nods. And you? You hold your head a little higher. Not because you're proud of what you did, but because you've learned to live with the echo of it. To walk through shame and keep walking. Historians still debate whether symbolic punishments worked long-term. Did they prevent sin? Or just create a caste of quiet rebels? Some think the system bred hypocrisy. Others believe it formed a strange kind of resilience. What's certain is that it left marks, both on clothing and on souls. Your house welcomes you like an old friend. You unpin the letter, set it on the table, stare at it for a long moment, and then you fold it, neatly, precisely, like something precious, or at least familiar, because tomorrow's another day, and you'll wear it again. But for tonight, you let yourself forget. You wake up to the soft scratch of something unfamiliar against your skin. It's not wool, and it's not the linen undershirt you carefully mended last week. No, this is rougher, cruder. It's sackcloth, coarse, unbleached, and about as comforting as a pine cone in your boot. Congratulations! You've been sentenced to public penance, and this itchy new wardrobe is only the beginning. You shuffle out of your home, eyes down, shoulders heavy with shame, and possibly splinters. The collar chafes and every movement reminds you this isn't your clothing. It belongs to the town, to judgment, to the church. You've been dressed in repentance. The walk to the meeting house is slower than usual. Not because your legs are sore, though they are, but because every step feels like a confession. The sackcloth is deliberately visible, and paired with a long white hood called a coif or a dunce cap, depending on how cruel the magistrate was feeling that day. You look like you wandered out of a poorly directed morality play. The children giggle. A few older folks nod somberly. One man spits, theatrically missing your path by about 1.5 feet. You resist the urge to thank him for the courtesy. The historical fact? Sackcloth and ashes weren't just biblical symbols. They were legal prescriptions. In Puritan Massachusetts, for instance, wrongdoers guilty of lying, breaking the Sabbath, or other moral failings were sometimes ordered to appear in church dressed in humiliating garb, seated apart from the congregation. You weren't just meant to feel sorry. You had to look it. Fringe tidbit? In at least one recorded case in Plymouth Colony, the accused had to stand barefoot for the entire sermon while wearing a wooden sign reading, "I stood idly by," because he failed to stop someone else from committing a crime. Imagine being punished not for doing wrong but for being a bystander. Colonial New England. Come for the sermons, stay for the guilt. You finally reach the meeting house. Everyone's already inside. And everyone, absolutely everyone, turns to look when you enter. There's no sneaking into the back pew this time. The constable points, yes, he actually points, to a small, uncomfortable bench near the pulpit. Reserved seating, but not the good kind. You sit. The sackcloth rasps against your neck. The hood droops awkwardly, blinding your peripheral vision. The sermon begins. It's about sin. Of course it is. You try to listen. Really you do. But it's hard to focus when you know people are watching you instead of the preacher. Watching your posture. Your expression. How deeply you bow your head when the word repent is used. And it's used a lot. Historians still argue whether this form of punishment created sincere remorse, or just really good actors. Some believe it was part of a larger social theater, one where repentance was performative, a necessary display of submission to community norms. Others think it genuinely reformed behavior, through a cocktail of fear, discomfort, and public scorn. You sit there unmoving as the sermon stretches on. An hour, maybe 2. Time folds in on itself. Your foot falls asleep, then your spine, then your ability to care. But then, just as you think it's finally over, the preacher addresses you. He doesn't use your name, just your sin. The liar among us, he says. Or the idle soul. Or the adulterous spirit. The words echo off the beams and sink into the wood. You can almost hear them nest there. You stand. You're supposed to. Part of the process. The congregation watches as you read from a prepared statement, a confession, often dictated by the elders, recited with the enthusiasm of someone chewing sand. You acknowledge your fault. You seek forgiveness. You humbly submit. Some people cry during this part. You don't. But you think about it. Once you're done, there's a long pause. Then the preacher nods, dismisses you with a prayer. You're allowed to return to your seat, but not your regular one. Not yet. Redemption is a process, and a publicly visible one. You file out after the service, still wearing the sackcloth. The hood itches. Your skin is red where the coarse threads rubbed raw. You think about how much of this is about repentance, and how much is about control. Public penance was never private. It wasn't designed to heal. It was designed to remind, over and over, like an emotional bruise that never quite fades. Still, something shifts as you step outside. A young girl offers you a flower. You blink at it, unsure if you're allowed to accept. She nods. You take it. It's a weed, really a dandelion, but right now it feels like mercy. You tuck it into your sleeve. It doesn't match the sackcloth, but that's the point. Later that evening, you sit at home, the itchy garment folded on the floor beside you like a molted shell. The fire crackles. Your back aches. But there's quiet. Maybe that's what you wanted all along. You think of the preacher's eyes. Sharp. Unforgiving. You wonder if he's ever worn the sackcloth himself. Probably not. These punishments tend to go one way. And yet, there's something about the absurdity of the whole thing. The coif. The coarse cloth. The designated seating. Feels like theater. Morality dressed in burlap and awkward silence. Historians still debate whether these rituals of public penance reduce crime, or just taught people to hide it better. One scholar even suggested it created a culture of dual lives. The outwardly obedient, inwardly rebellious citizen. A good Puritan on Sunday, a slightly less Puritan one on Wednesday afternoon. As you drift toward sleep, your fingers trace the weave of the sackcloth one more time. Rough. Unforgiving. A kind of honesty in its own way. And you wonder, if shame can be sewn into fabric, maybe forgiveness can be too. Your legs are already tired and you haven't even started. That's the thing about punitive processions, you don't get to stroll. You march. Through town. Past neighbors. In silence or chant depending on the mood. And if you think this sounds like the world's saddest parade, congratulations. You're beginning to understand colonial justice. Today you've been sentenced to the walk of shame New England style. It's not a figure of speech. It's quite literal. You're to walk, possibly barefoot, holding a sign or object that proclaims your wrongdoing. Maybe a rod if you've committed domestic violence, or a bottle if public drunkenness was your crime. Visibility is the punishment. Or, more accurately, humiliation is the vehicle and your riding shotgun. You begin at the meeting house. There's no formal bell or procession leader. Just you, the constable, who always looks a little too pleased with himself, and the murmuring crowd that materializes as soon as you take your first step. It's a strange feeling, walking through streets you've known your whole life while suddenly feeling like you don't belong. People look. Some with mockery, some with pity. A few avoid your eyes, and that's almost worse. Here's the mainstream fact. Colonial towns in Massachusetts, Plymouth, and Connecticut routinely use these shame processions as both punishment and performance. The goal wasn't just justice, it was example-making. A reminder to the rest of the community. See this person? Don't be this person. You pass the cobbler's shop, the blacksmith, the tavern. Each familiar doorway now a stage where your sin gets re-announced. It's like social media 17th century edition. Public shame, zero filters, infinite reposts via gossip. Your hands grip the object you're carrying. A heavy stone labeled thief. Tied around your neck with rough rope. It bounces awkwardly with each step, bruising your collarbone, dragging against your chest. It's not heavy enough to crush you, just heavy enough to remind you. A fringe example? There are records of a woman in the Massachusetts Bay Colony who had to walk through town holding a dead chicken because she'd falsely accused a neighbor of theft, claiming they'd stolen poultry. The chicken wasn't just symbolic. It was rotting. Because olfactory humiliation was apparently part of the package. You turn down King's Road, feet slapping against dirt and stone. Dust kicks up, coating your calves. A dog barks. A group of boys jeers from a distance, mimicking your gait. One even limps dramatically, though there's nothing wrong with his legs. He just likes the performance. The thing is, these punishments weren't spontaneous. They were calculated. Scheduled for peak traffic, peak visibility. Just after church, just before market, and sometimes they were repeated. Weekly processions in some cases for as long as a month. If you're going to learn your lesson, the town decided you're going to live it. Again and again. Historians still argue whether the psychological toll of these punishments was effective or just corrosive. Some point to lower crime rates. Others argue that it created a toxic culture of silence, secrets, and judgment. When everyone is a possible marcher, nobody really feels safe. You pass the pillory you were once locked into, and for a split second you miss it. At least then you were stationary. This moving display, it's worse. It makes you participate, forces you to be the banner, the confession, the warning sign. You remember that time months ago when someone else marched through town. You didn't laugh, but you didn't look away either. You watched, you judged, you moved on. And now here you are. Different sin, same path. There's a designated endpoint, somewhere near the public well. Once you reach it, you're allowed to rest, but only for a moment. Then you turn around and walk back. Because symmetry is apparently important in Puritan justice. You make the pivot like a soldier, face set, mouth dry. Someone offers you water. The constable frowns. You decline. Better not to test him. On the way back, the crowd thins slightly. People have seen what they came for. They have dinner to cook, grain to grind. Your shame parade is now just another footnote in the town's ongoing narrative. You reach the meeting house again. The constable mumbles something about mercy and unties the rope. The stone drops from your neck and hits the ground with a puff of dust. You flinch at the sound, and that's it. No grand conclusion. No applause. You simply go home. Lighter in body but heavier in mind. Later you'll hear people talk. Not to you, of course. About you. They'll debate whether you've truly changed. Whether the punishment was too harsh or not enough. Some will say you bore it with dignity. Others will swear you smirked halfway through. Historians still debate whether these processions bred empathy or cruelty. Did they bring communities together through shared morality? Or fracture them with public shame? There's no consensus. Only stories. And some pretty impressive blisters. At home you peel off your torn shoes and wash your feet. The water runs brown then pink. You soak in silence, the soft echo of your own steps still thudding in your ears. The stone sits by the doorway, forgotten by everyone but you. You consider tossing it into the woods. But then you leave it. Maybe it's your reminder. Or maybe you just don't have the strength to lift it again. As you lie in bed, legs aching and pride shredded, one thought drifts through your mind like a stubborn ember. At least you didn't have to carry the chicken. You're sprawled on a creaky wooden bench in a dim New England tavern. The kind of place where the air smells of stale ale and damp wool. The fire in the hearth pops softly, casting flickers on the low ceiling beams, and outside, the wind hums through the sleepy village, carrying the faint creak of a shutter. It's late. Maybe too late to be out in a place like this, where every shadow feels like it's judging you. You've trudged through colonial New England's peculiar punishments all night. The stocks that pinched your neck, the whipping post's sharp sting, the icy dunk of the ducking stool, and that eerie scold's bridle clamping your tongue. Now, as the tavern's last candle gutters, you're left to ponder what all this meant. Was it justice or just a village's way of keeping everyone in line? Let's settle in. Let your eyelids grow heavy, and think about how this strange world of rules and retribution faded into something softer. This tavern, with its warped floorboards and smoky haze, is a good spot to reflect. In the 1690s, places like Boston or Salem weren't just towns. They were experiments in godly living, where every sin felt like a crack in the community's foundation. Historians say the Puritans believed punishment wasn't just about pain. It was theater, a public show to scare folks straight. Take the pillory you stood in a few hours back, dodging overripe apples. Mainstream records from Massachusetts Bay Colony show it was used for everything from drunkenness to seditious speech. The goal? Shame you so deeply you'd never dare step out of line again. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some townsfolk, especially in smaller villages, would sneak food to pilloried friends at night, slipping bread through the wooden slats. It's like they knew the whole thing was a bit over the top, like a school play where everyone's trying too hard. You shift on the bench and the wood groans. Historians still argue whether these punishments were truly cruel or just practical. Compared to England's hangings for petty theft, New England's methods, stocks, fines, or a quick dunk, seem almost gentle. Yet, for the punished, the real sting was social. Being branded or banished like you felt earlier didn't just scar your skin. It cut you off from neighbors, from trade, from survival. Imagine trying to barter for flour when everyone whispers, "That's the one who slandered the minister." Funny thing is, some banished folks didn't go far. Just set up camp a mile out, waiting for the town to cool off. You can almost picture one now, hunched by a fire, muttering about how they'll show him all someday. The tavern's quiet now, save for a drunk snoring in the corner. You're thinking about the Quakers you met. Those stubborn souls who kept preaching despite Boston's lash. Their defiance makes you wonder. Were punishments less about sin and more about control? The Puritans had a knack for turning gossip or a sharp tongue into a crime, didn't they? That scold's bridle you wore. Ouch, the memory of that iron cage still pinches. It wasn't just about silencing you. It was about making sure everyone else stayed meek. But let's chuckle for a second. Some women records show, got so good at dodging the bridle they'd whisper their gossip in code like colonial spies. Bet they'd have loved a group chat. You yawn and the fire's down to embers. The punishments you've seen, stocks, whips, dunks, weren't just odd. They were a mirror of a world obsessed with order. Yet as you sit here you realize something. This world's gone. By the 1700s, Enlightenment ideas crept in, and folks started questioning if public shame was really the answer. Towns like this one traded pillories for fines, and the ducking stool became a quirky tale for grandkids. You're safe now, no iron brands or icy rivers to fear. The tavern keeper shuffles by, tossing another log on the fire, and you catch a whiff of pine. It's cozy, isn't it? Like that feeling when you finally crawl under a heavy quilt after a long day. Let's slow down now, let the world soften. You're not in that chilly village anymore, no stocks or bridles to worry about. The tavern's warmth wraps around you like a favorite sweater, and the fire's gentle crackle is the only sound left. Picture the village outside, sleeping under a blanket of stars, the wind whispering through pines, carrying away the last echoes of judgment. You're just here breathing slow, sinking into the bench, letting every muscle loosen. Those peculiar punishments? They're just stories now, fading like old ink on parchment. Feel your shoulders drop, your thoughts blur into a hazy glow. The world's quiet, and you're drifting safe in this moment. Sleep's calling, soft as a lullaby. Let it take you. Sweet dreams.